Hi, this is Maureen Crean, and you're listening to the audio version of my novel Run. I hope you enjoy this Irish family saga, and thanks for listening. Run is an original work of fiction by Maureen Crean. It is a registered work with the Writers Guild of America, and Maureen Crean holds the sole rights to the copyright. This podcast is for your entertainment only. All rights are reserved. This material may not be published, broadcast, rewritten, or redistributed, in whole or part, without the written express permission of Maureen Crean. All characters appearing in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Content advisory. This book is intended for mature audiences and contains violence, language, and sexual activity. So be warned.
Treat a horse like a woman and a woman like a horse, and they'll both win for you. Elizabeth Arden. Episode 2. Burroughs Farm was a 200-year-old thoroughbred stud on the outskirts of Lexington, Kentucky. Blue grass blanketed the rolling hills in deep green velvet. The farm, as it was known to the locals, was once a prestigious breeder of champion racehorses. In its glory days, up to 74 horses had been housed, half of them owned by the Burroughs family. But those days were gone. The farm had failed to produce a Kentucky Derby contender in over 25 years. 10 of those races had been on my watch. A whole decade of broken promises and dashed dreams. The beautiful antebellum mansion contained a sprawl of massive rooms and 6 working fireplaces. Still whispering of its scandalous past, the great hall had been where racing royalty waltzed the nights away. They had lived, won, and lost, while celebrating the good life as only a few can afford to. Now only dust bunnies danced across the shiny oak floors, the room's majestic appearance masking the truth. Like most horse breeders and betters, we were always careful to put up a good front. Only one thing kept spirits alive: the improbable, illogical magic of an old Kentucky stud. Every foal born was a Derby Day hopeful, and every worker on the farm a dreamer. One day sighed through the minds of the owners, grooms, and stable boys and girls, even me, veterinarian and surrogate horse mother. I kept fighting the gambler's itch, that breathless moment when I knew I should walk away, as the devil whispered, "One more lass, you'll win this time." I'll leave, I told myself, after this year's race. But the derbies came and went, and still I stayed. The barns would soon be teeming with grooms and exercise riders, but for now I had them all to myself. It was my favorite time of day, the in-between, as the sun began its slow rise, illuminating ripe for the picking cotton boll clouds in pink and iridescent orange. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. My eyes adjusted. I had taken this path to the stables 1,000 times, but I still wanted to remember it. Stepping into the barn, I felt the hairs stand on the back of my neck. A dark figure with Popeye arms was loitering in the shadows. It was the strangest feeling, fear mixed with love. I knew he was dead, murdered in fact, but I could have sworn it was my grandfather, Boss Joe. What an eerie resemblance. Now I knew why my mother had been so scared when she first met her father-in-law. She wasn't alone. Everyone trembled at the sight of the caravans parked along the road. The Irish travelers had a long tradition of running cons, petty thievery, and fortune-telling, but this man was different than the ones I had known as a child. He was menacing. This was not a simple con. If I had learned anything from my grandfather, it was to never show fear. So I squared my shoulders, crossed my arms, and stood my ground. Like an alpha dog marking his territory, he strutted down the aisle as if he owned the place. Short and squat, with too much muscle, I noticed him pull his shirt sleeve down to cover a tattoo on his vein-poppin' left bicep. All I caught was a snake's fangs sunk into something green. A shamrock, perhaps? Weird that he might hide it. Traveler men wore their clan markings in the way a peacock flared its feathers. Who was this guy? And more importantly, what had my father done this time? I wasn't going to give the bastard the benefit of the doubt, so I cut to the chase. We have no roofs that need tarring, so you may as well get lost.
Quick with your brogue, you stupid knacker, he spat back. The family has a message for your deadbeat father. Pay up!
I have a message too. Not my problem. He puffed up his chest even further and lunged towards me.
Shite flies higher when it's hit with a stick. Know what I mean? You and your fancy digs. You think you're better than us? But blood is blood. His debt is yours.
Look, you feckless git, I answered, leaning in despite my impulse to run. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of, or I'm calling the cops.
Whoa, calm down, you arse.
He didn't blink, his eyes soulless as he spit on the ground, and blocked my only escape route.
Do what they say, and no one gets hurt.
His words didn't match his actions. I picked up the power hose we used to clean the stables. Leave. As he charged me, I let loose on the nozzle, the force of the spray pushing him back, but not far enough. He was closing in fast. Startled by the ruckus, the horses were rearing in their stalls, and clouds of dust filled the air. Get the hell out of here! I could feel the thunder of cowboy boots running towards us as he twisted my ponytail around his forearm, pulling me into his face. The stench of cigarettes and putrid teeth made me want to puke.
No one treats me like that, especially not a slag like you. If it were up to me, I'd drop you right here in the horse shite you are. And if you don't pay up, I'll get me chance.
He threw me back, the hose dropping from my hands as I hit the stable wall. The grooms were chasing him down, and I could hear shouting in the distance as the rubber serpent lashed around my legs. When I tried to stand, I slipped in the newly formed mud puddle and sat for a second, trying to clear my head. Max Burroughs, heir apparent of Burroughs Farm, my racing partner and best friend, switched the water off at the wall. I totally had it handled, I said, taking his preferred hand. I can see that. Becky, my right-hand woman, came running down the aisle. At 5'2", those little legs must have galloped the whole length of the barn, but she hadn't even broken a sweat. Cute and compact, Becky had a blonde pixie cut and a no-nonsense attitude. Much to the guy's disappointment, she was more interested in work and women than socializing, and now ran our small Kentucky Derby team of 6. This included our jockey and trainer, who had worked together for over 3 years, the minimum time it took to train a champion. "That rat bastard," Becky said, "just got away on a motorcycle with paper plates. You okay, boss?" I was halfway through saying yes when my knees caved, Max grabbing me before I could flop back into the mud. "I need you to get the guys and check on the horses," he said to Becky. "Dr. O'Malley is fine. I've got her." His arms tightened around my waist, and as soon as the coast was clear, he picked me up and carried me to the offices. "Put me down! Don't be ridiculous!" Max opened the door with one hand and carried me across the room to the burgundy leather tufted couch that had been there for as long as I could remember. I had been 13 when I arrived at the farm. Max a charmer, even at 16. Today, at 41, he was a fixture in Louisville, the life of every party, and one of the best poker players in town. We had been many things to each other over the years, but never lovers. Max's father had one rule on the farm: never date the staff. So Max dated everybody else in town, but never really walked down the aisle. My own pops had similar sentiments. No matter what it looks like, when you worked for a rich man, you would always be the help. Max honored his father, and I knew that even my old man could be wise at times. "What was that all about?" he said. He walked over to my desk and pulled out some Advil, as well as a bottle of water from the fridge. As he handed me the pills, he squared his jaw, leaned against the desk, and crossed his arms. He was just waiting for me to try to spin this shit into gold, but I had nothing. Some loser trying to collect Pop's gambling debts. My temples were pounding, and I threw back the pills. Max shook his head. "Not him, you. You were trembling so bad I thought you were going to have a seizure. The only other time I ever saw you that way was when old Brown's bull almost gored you." "Oh, leave me alone," I thought. I laid my head on the arm of the couch and tried to think of ways to get rid of him. "I almost lost my mother's locket," I muttered. "Playing rodeo clown to get that monster away from you. Once I'd saved your ass, I had to go back into that paddock to find the damn thing. And did you see the balls swinging on that beast? You would have been shaking too." I took advantage of the pause to introduce a subject change. "You look terrible," I sighed. "Late night, or are you just coming in?" With eyes the color of a Bloody Mary, it was clear he had been betting all night or off betting some beauty. Surely he thought he'd sneak in before anyone else got here. I got it. Enough stress could crack the strongest granite. "Is your family going to ruin this?" he said, refusing to take the bait. "Of course not. You know how dramatic the Irish are. Don't worry about that punk. I'll take care of it." Max nodded towards a picture of the winner's circle at Churchill Downs, where a young teen stood between his father and mother. The sunlight had faded the roses in the picture, but not the smiles on their faces. It was a bittersweet memory for him. He had lost his mother later that summer to cancer. I think it might have even been the last picture they took together. He shifted and pointed to the picture. "It was the May before you got here," he said. "Our last winter, and the captain owned this town." He seemed to grow 6 inches taller on the way to the winner's circle, and folks embraced him like he was somebody. He sighed, tired eyes soft with emotion. "I need to see him like that one more time before he dies." Max stood up and walked to the door in silence, turning back as he opened it. "Don't screw this up." No matter how hard I tried to clean the O'Malley family drama from my life, it was always there, like manure creeping into the seam of one's boots. Sometimes you just had to throw them out, or the stink would never leave. As the door shut, I pulled myself up, walking over to the desk. The bottle of cold water felt good on the back of my head, and I straightened, eyes fixed upon my Cornell diploma. Ivy League. That did me a lot of good now. I squeezed the bottle tight in my hand before launching it across the room in a sudden rage. Glass tinkled onto the floor as I sunk to my knees in a silent scream. I wanted to sob, to moan, to cry, but those tears had dried up many years ago. Every single family celebration had been marred with petty grievances and drunken egos. The shouting and the fisticuffs always arrived right after the hands of the clock passed the hour of one too many. I tried to envision a party dress that hadn't been stained after being splattered in blood, vomit, or beer. Every baby baptized in the fire of family feuding. Every wedding ending with the bride and groom's loved ones rolling in the dirt, trying to murder one another. It just wasn't fair. This was our dream, and again it was being threatened before it could come true. All those years we had tried and failed to get to the Kentucky Derby. Mickey's voice rang loud and clear in my mind. 24,000 3-year-olds try. Only 20 to the gate. Only 20 to the gate. So many horses trained that never made it. So many nights we had soup for dinner so the horses could graze on the best. And for what? Pissed off, I pulled out my phone to speak to dear old Dad and nip the family bullshit in the bud. As my call ended in voicemail, I realized I'd have to find the punk and handle it myself. I must have dozed off because my head jerked back at the knock on the door. Becky was standing there with a look of concern and a large white envelope in her hands. She stopped short to take in the scene before carefully stepping over the broken glass. "The papers came from Churchill Downs," she said. "The guys are so excited." "Would you mind running them up to Max in the house? I want to check on the horses before we load them up." "Sure, boss. But don't you even want to take a peek?" I smiled with every ounce of energy I had left, but I felt more dread than excitement. "Of course, but I have so much to handle right now. As soon as we get into town, we'll celebrate." Becky cast her eyes on the ground and slowly looked back up. Something was wrong. "What is it?" "The paychecks bounced, but the guys don't know," she added quickly. It wasn't the first time Becky's girlfriend, Susie, had alerted us to an overdrawn account. They're going to run them again tonight. I opened the desk and pulled out my checkbook. I had been saving for a world trip since I started at the farm. I guess that's what all the postcards had been for, keeping the dream alive. But we just had to get through the next week, and everything would be all right. I'd tell Max after the race. I left $100 in my account so the bank wouldn't close it, and I ripped a deposit slip from the farm's checkbook. "Don't tell anyone," I said, handing it to Becky. "Just run into town and top up the account. We've had enough drama for one day, don't you think?" I leaned back in the chair, not the least bit worried about the Burroughs problems. Money could fix those. The O'Malleys, on the other hand, that was a different story. Whether I wanted to face it or not, Mickey, Pops, and I wouldn't be free of our debtors until someone paid up. My traveler relatives would pry our fingers open for a penny and keep their hooks in even after someone was stone cold dead and 6 feet under.
If you like this episode of Run,
Please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click the like button. We donate 25% of our proceeds to A Bed of My Own, a 501c3 dedicated to homeless mothers and their children. Thanks for sharing.